Lots of acronyms. Good
Yes,
morning.
thank you.
Privileged to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As stated, my name is Beth Stone Smith, and I'm a program manager with the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and specifically plant protection and quarantine, which works to deal with invasive insect pests and plant diseases. Specifically, a couple of programs I work with is the Glassy Wing Sharpshooter Pierce's Disease Program, European Grapevine Moth, and then I handle the funding that comes in through our agency and is given over to CDFA and the counties to do much of the work that they're doing here. So as I already mentioned by multiple speakers, this is a very cooperative program. We rely on our partners at the state and at the county level to implement regulations and implement survey activities. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on ACP HLB, which we've already heard pieces of, so I won't go into great detail. But just to give a little bit of background there, and then I'll give a little bit of background on what we've done, actions we've taken, and then a little piece of the funding and how that comes in through the federal side. So already mentioned, ACP was discovered in Florida back in 1998, and despite efforts, it spread by 2001 to 37 counties, and subsequently has spread to other states. We have it not only in Florida and Texas, but also detections in Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Arizona, Hawaii, and of course California, as well as some island nations like Puerto Rico and U.S. territories of Samoa. Specifically in California, you've already heard we have quarantines, either whole or partial, in 22 counties in California. And then on the HLB side of the problem, in 2005, we've already heard about Florida's situation there, and by 2015, they had HLB detections in 37 counties out of their 67 counties in the state. So we've already heard background on the trouble there. Currently, all of Florida and Texas are quarantined for HLB, and Victoria and others have already given background on our detections here in California, where we have 2 quarantine areas that kind of mesh and meet up together down in the Los Angeles County area, both the Hacienda Heights and the San Gabriel finds that Victoria's already talked about. So some of the actions that the federal government has taken, and this program obviously has had separate pieces in each state. As each state has had its detections and has had their issues spread and has had their problems, there's been pieces of funding. But a larger effort was put in place back in 2014 called the Multi-Agency Coordinated Group, or MAC. And this is a group not only with APHIS. We are kind of call ourselves the action agency side of USDA, whereas Agricultural Research Service will do more basic research. So with APHIS and with ARS, the Agricultural Research Service, along with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture and State Departments of Agriculture, they formed this group to make it a single point of contact for all activities going on. That not only helps California learn from Florida, it helps with all of the research that's going on so there isn't duplicative efforts, the information's being shared, all of that. And it also sparked a greater sense of urgency for the citrus industry to have this large coordinated effort across multiple states led by federal entities. So in addition to that MAC implementation, we also have biological control agent work being done, as Victoria already mentioned. The survey and regulatory enforcement measures, we had some of those mentioned here. Stemming the movement of ACP around the state is critically important, as the industry has told us, and so those regulatory measures like tarping of loads and treatments being mandated before things can move are part of those regulatory enforcements to not allow ACP to spread freely. As far as the funding goes, on the MAC side of the program, there's been $20 million provided so far in the last couple of years, with 30 projects being carried out by state cooperators, universities, and private companies. Obviously, the focus of those projects is to have real-time, practical solutions for growers in the near term. So not only is there background research being done to kind of do building blocks on information, but there's near term, we need information now, focus on a lot of this research for growers. More than $3 million of that funding comes to projects that are in California specifically. And then the other piece of funding that's big for us here in California, we've heard people say the word CHIRP. That's another acronym, Citrus Health Response Program. That's a line item under our federal budget that receives funding, and that funding is spread out across the states that have citrus. The largest amount of funding going to Florida and California, and that's certainly reflective of the activities that are going on, as well as the immense amount of citrus acreage in both of those states. And there's been $37.8 million in those Citrus Health Response Program funds dispersed in fiscal year 2015. Much of that is that $10.8 million. You've heard that number thrown around. That goes directly to CDFA for their activities. That's included in our number for California. And then we do have some staff with our agency that does some nursery certification work to try and keep nurseries who produce citrus stock in compliance with regulations and keeping them in business so that they can move their product. So a couple of folks mentioned other federal agencies that are heavily invested in this. I believe it was Andrew from Florida Citrus Mutual that mentioned the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Because of the 2014 Farm Bill is giving $125 million over the next 5 years to citrus-related issues. We have collaborations that Victoria mentioned on the border with Mexico and with Mexican agricultural agencies to help not only survey for ACP and HLB, but we also have staff that works for international services that works directly in those countries to try and facilitate information so that we know what's going on to reduce the risk of what's going to be happening or could be happening in our state. There's just a last piece some of my folks put in here on future projects, and much of that has already been mentioned. The thermal treatments Andrew mentioned already on trees is something that has worked in Florida specifically. There is some work that's been done on dog teams sniffing out trees that are HLB positive. The benefit of a dog being able to sniff that out is that you know early on that the tree is infected, and you can remove that inoculum. Part of the two-pronged approach is not only reducing the vector, ACP, but you have to remove that inoculum in the system so that they're not spreading it around. So having dogs that can detect those kinds of things would be very valuable to implement.
Excuse me, removing the inoculum, you said?
Yeah, so the tree the tree has that bacteria in it that the insect is feeding on and moving around. So when they detect HLB, they remove the tree. So you're taking out that bacteria. It's considered an inoculum. The insect can't pick it up and move it around if it doesn't have it sitting there to feed on. Okay. Much like our glassy-winged sharpshooter Pierce's disease issue. Same dynamics. And so just in conclusion, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As has already been stated, highly cooperative program. I think one of the benefits I've experienced working my career in the great state of California is not only the dynamics with the State Department of Agriculture and the counties and university. We really benefit from that local level entities of getting things done. We've seen things in other countries in USDA and even in other states where the coordination is not such that things get done at that local level. So we really benefit from that. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I do. I was going to ask the question. I figured I didn't need to, but you are collaborating with Mexico in this whole deal, and that is working out. I farmed down there for a few years in the late 80s, and it was helter-skelter.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's changed anymore, but it's pretty tough to get your arms around it, I would think.
It is, absolutely, but the effort certainly needs to be made so that we can get as much information as we can out of them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next witness is Melissa Cregan, Deputy Agricultural Commissioner, Fresno County.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. At the local level, from our perspective, pest exclusion, it starts with exclusion. We really try to keep these pests from coming in and getting established. We realized the movement of Asian citrus psyllid fairly early in 2009 when we had a detection of Asian citrus psyllids on curry leaves that were found in a shipment from our express parcel carriers And actually, one of our dog teams found that shipment. And so our exclusion division, we have folks every morning who get up at, report to the terminals at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they look for packages that are going to be distributed throughout California that may have plant material in them, and with that, pests. Because folks who put, oranges, citrus in a box in Florida to send to their aunt in Fresno, they don't necessarily understand that there could be pests that they would be moving. So, that's a very important program that we have. Funding for that program comes through several areas, but the Farm Bill for the dog teams. There's a small amount of funding that comes through CDFA for non-dog team functions in Fresno County. That's about $50,000 a year. It doesn't pay for the staff of, when that division's fully staffed of, 5 to 6 inspectors. $50,000 doesn't get us very far. So a lot of that money then is local funding through the county's general fund that we use for those sorts of activities. We also inspect incoming nursery shipments. That's another area where we see risk of Asian citrusillid or other exotic pests moving in. Our next level of defense at the local level is our pest detection trapping. We have several general detection programs, one specifically for Asian citrusillid. We put out about 3,100 residential traps throughout the county. Those are serviced monthly. It takes us about 5 full-time trappers to get those serviced. As well, the Glassy Wing Sharpshooter program uses the same type of trap, and often the same hosts. So we have those traps screened for Asian citrusillid as well. We have about 1,600 of those traps in commercial citrus. We have about 50 traps in packing houses, 80 in nurseries, and another 600 residential. So all told, within the county of Fresno, just the county of Fresno, we have about 5,400 traps where we're looking for Asian citrusillid. And then when we take those traps down, we service them, we send them to the state lab where I imagine some unfortunate people have to sit there and scan over these traps because, as you know, this pest is very small. And so they look for these pests, and then they let us know, the state know, who informs us, when a suspect has been found. So once a suspect is identified, we work with our state and federal partners to distribute information. They want to know where our current traps are, because once we have a find, the state takes over and puts out our delimitation traps. So they want to know where our current traps are. We have to transfer all that information to them. They want to know where commercial citrus is within usually a 5-mile radius of that find. So we pass on that information. We develop quarantine boundaries cooperatively with CDFA to, obviously try to contain that pest. And then within that, it was mentioned before, the problem of abandoned groves. And, that's going to continue to be a challenge. And, I'll touch on that here in a little bit. Activities that we directly at the county, we sign up sheds that are outside of the quarantine area with compliance agreements, and those are the ones that really feel the biggest impact. Is if they are outside of a quarantine area and they're supplying groves, or within the quarantine area, they have to do the spraying and the tarping and all of that. So we have a limited amount of resources that we can do sort of spot checks at those packing houses to make sure that they're doing the correct paperwork and following the correct procedures, tarping the loads, doing the treatments. But we have no funding for that. None of these programs fund that sort of follow-up to check compliance with these sorts of programs. Our funding only covers detection trapping. And so At the county level, we have a limited resource to do those sorts of activities. I provided you guys with a map that shows the Fresno County overview. Fresno County so far is not completely quarantined. Unfortunately, this year is driving us to that full county quarantine fairly quickly. It was sort of a slow progression. In Tulare County, they had some quarantines along the border that overlapped into Fresno County. That was in about 2013. Our first find was right actually at the very corner of Fresno County. It was about 50 feet into our county from what would be considered Tulare County. And that expanded our quarantine up into the Orange Cove area, which, you know, as it is named, has a lot of citrus and packing sheds. Things were quiet from 2013 until 2014. We had no other finds within the county. In 2015 was when we had our next find. That was in somewhat of the Orange Cove area. It was about half a mile outside of that quarantine area that was from the 2013 finds. So that expanded the quarantine again. And then very late in 2015, December, we had our first find in the city of Fresno. So now we switched from having that contiguous quarantine area with Tulare County to having another quarantine area, which eventually became contiguous with the quarantine in Madera. So now we're starting to link up quarantine areas. Now in 2016, I believe we're up to 6 finds as of last Friday. This map shows the current quarantine area that we have mapped out. So where you see the finds in Selma and up in Clovis, we don't currently have the quarantine area, the boundaries drawn for that yet because the finds are so new. But pretty much what that's going to do is connect a large section of the county. We'll have easily over 50% of our citrus production area under quarantine at that point. And we'll be looking probably towards a full county quarantine probably within this next year. Again, that decision gets made cooperatively through the County Agricultural Commissioner and CDFA. So with that spread, you can kind of see on the map that these psyllids are being found along major freeways for the most part. A lot of them are being found in residential areas, the majority of them now. And so really our biggest challenge at the local level as we see going forward is going to be dealing with urban psyllids in that situation. Because the growers, obviously, they're very aware of the problem. They're very educated on it. They know what they need to do, and they're putting in a lot of work. Our residential community is less informed, and you know, we try to compensate for that through outreach. We do a fair amount of media. We do television interviews for local news. We do radio spots. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out to any interested parties can sign up for. We attend the public meetings when there are going to be treatments. And then we also meet with elected officials for cities and the county officials to let them know kind of what will be going on when there are fines in their communities. One of the challenges that was brought up is going to be our residential nursery industry, in that currently when a quarantine is declared, the trees that are being sold at these residential nurseries, they're tagged by CDFA, and the tag says, you know, don't take this out of the quarantine area. Unfortunately, a lot of our residential folks, they don't know where the quarantine area is. To them, this is kind of like the tag on your mattress that says, do not remove. They don't pay a lot of attention to it, unfortunately, and I think when we start seeing HLB arise, it's going to be the hardest to control it in the cities, just because we have a lot less control over them. We don't have a lot of enforcement tools. That I can't follow every citrus tree that's bought in a citrus nursery and follow them home to make sure they aren't taking it outside of the quarantine area. We'll never have those sorts of resources. And then also another problem that we have are trees that are being sold at non-retail nurseries, at swap meets, roadside vendors. These are people that are grafting trees at home, and it's illegal. They're not, allowed to be doing these things, but the amount of resources it takes to control these sorts of situations it's just tremendous. And again, we have no funding for that sort of control. All of that comes, if we do it at the local level, all of that will be having to be funded by the counties. And every county is in a different financial situation as to how feasible it is to direct your resources to that problem. Also, a lot of these swap meet, there's no requirements on the swap meet managers like there are with our certified farmers markets, where there's some responsibility on the market manager to make sure that certain things are being complied with. The swap meets, there is nothing like that. So we can go and we can clear out all the citrus in any given day at a swap meet. And then the next week, they'll all be right back because they know we don't have the resources to be there. And if we can get the information on the correct information, we could go down the road of a civil penalty for selling that citrus. But the resources that takes is time consuming as well. And now we've gotten rid of one small grower, and there's probably 5-10 more that will just take their place in our county alone. So that's really where I see our biggest challenge coming from, and I don't know that I can really offer any ideas necessarily at this point as to how we can control that, but it's a problem that we're going to need to address, because that's where we're going to have these diseased trees being sold, is not likely in our commercial nurseries, but these outlets that are difficult to pin them down. They'll be on a different street corner throughout Fresno on any given day. And how do you find them? That really is our challenge. So I think, I'll wrap up with that, is just that at the county level, there are fundings for, to find these psyllids, but then once we find them, our resources are pretty limited as to what we have to deal with them at that point. It's kind of all in the hands of CDFA to do the treatments, and then we've got to do as much surveillance as we can at these markets where trees are being sold, and that's difficult.
So looking forward, you go into an area and you do the trappings, and you find some have, some do not. Looking long term at this, you have multiple homeowners who have these trees. How far are we going to go where year after year the state and the industry is paying to have these trappings done to see if there are pests in residential trees? I know we're addressing the immediate problem and the immediate concerns, but has there been thought to how long are we going to allow for homeowners to have these trees in the yards, and what's the responsibility of the homeowner? Because right now, the industry is bearing the full responsibility for all of the expense associated with the detection and protection for residences and their orange trees.
I don't know how directly I can answer that question. We do a lot of outreach to homeowners to let them know that this isn't just a citrus industry problem, and this is a California problem, and that I have 3 citrus trees in my own yard. I like them. I want to keep them. I recently went out to a residence on we had sort of a tour for some foreign officials, and this woman was telling me the story of her grapefruit tree, and this thing was 20 feet tall, And she's telling me about how she bought this when they moved into the house. I mean, this tree had sentimental meaning to her. And so going to her and asking her to remove that tree, again, that's one of those situations, I don't think that that would be a successful ask. And then we would be in the position of, can we mandate that trees will be removed from residences? I don't know if Victoria can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that we have the authority to remove trees that are diseased. And we have used that authority in San Gabriel on one property that did refuse to volunteer the tree. I don't think that authority would expand to trees that are not diseased. That would all be voluntary.
What about trees that are, where the pest is present and not diseased yet?
That's a difficult one because just because you have a psyllid doesn't mean you have the disease. You can have the psyllid, and it can be, a generally infested area. And if the disease is not brought into that area, the psyllid can persist and the trees will continue to live. The only issue is when the psyllid carries that disease into an area and the trees become diseased.
So the psyllids aren't always carrying the disease.
Correct.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In the mid-'80s, when there was talk of shutting down all the border stations in the state because they were expensive to run, we managed as an industry to keep them open. Have we determined where these pests, because this is, I mean, we got the citrus problem today. We had the glassy-winged sharpshooter a couple of years ago. Would those border stations, do we know where did this thing come from Mexico? Did it come from, do we even know where it originated from? And would the border stations, in your opinion, are they a tool to keep this kind of stuff from coming in?
Yeah, they definitely are a tool, and we rely really heavily on the border stations and the counties with their dog teams. The problem, I think, that what we have is we have multiple international ports of entry into our state. We're a state that has a very diverse populace.
Yeah, but we have pretty strict laws as far as fruit and stuff coming in from out of the country.
Yeah, we definitely do, but I can tell you, I was at San Francisco Airport a couple years ago doing a talk with the border protection folks there and their Beagle Brigade, and they had a table set with just citrus stuff, fruit, dried fruit, leaves, different things. And I said, wow, is that like a month's worth of stuff? No, Victoria, that was from yesterday. So yes, there are very strict rules about what you can and can't bring into the state, but many people either, they're just unaware of those rules, or they think it's just, I'm gonna bring this piece of my home country back with me, or my vacation memory, this delicious fruit that I had, I'm gonna bring some and graft it onto my tree. So I think people do it, it's either a naivete, they don't know, or they just don't feel that they're going to be doing anything to bring pests in or to damage our industry here. But there are many, multiple, like I said, international ports of entry. There's internet sales of just about anything and everything, and as much stuff as we catch coming through UPS and the U.S. Postal Service and FedEx, there's many things that we don't catch.
Well, and to add on to the U.S. Postal Service, that really is a problem within our dog team program, in that mail is protected by federal laws, that you have to have a search warrant to open a piece of mail. And so we have dog teams, and they can only work in certain post offices that have an MOU with the Postal Service. And then once they hit on one of these packages, they have to try to contact either the sender or the receiver and get permission to open that package, or if they can't get permission, then they have to get a federal warrant. And that's a long process. So again, the resources that it takes to catch this material coming in, our express carriers, we can open whatever we want. But the Postal Service is a completely different animal. And the limited amount of post offices that we are working in, we're definitely finding pests of concern. And, you know, we're trying our best to get into more post offices and find a way to deal with that issue. But, you know, it's definitely far from where it needs to be.
Yeah, I guess my point is, it is costly once you have these infestations. But when you get, all of a sudden you get fruits and vegetables quarantined, so we can't export them, now you're really talking some real money. So anything that we can do as we move forward in trying to figure out how to keep this stuff from happening, anything we can do up front is cheap compared to what happens once you get these outbreaks. And we warned of this way back in the day that, you know, we're just an accident waiting to happen, and we're seeing it. So, I don't know, maybe we should be concentrating on a few more resources up front to try to keep this stuff from happening.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next witness is Rick Harrison, Pest Control Advisor, Crop Production Services, CAPCA State Treasurer.